Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Psychology of Salah, a series on Ahlul Bayt TV. This consists of 10 programs which are loaded up online that look at the psychological aspects of our Salah, enabling us to get more out of our daily prayer and helping us to understand more deeply the effect that it can have upon us and why we are doing it, why we have to do this Salah 5 times a day. Again, like I said, this is a 10-part series and this is program 9. My guest is Brother Ghulam Abbas Laka, who will be taking us through, again, the stages of the Salah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, we've had the opportunity to think about practical aspects of the psychology of Salah, such that we can try and get something from our Salah that is a deeper connection, regardless of the amount of time we may have. So this is not about burdening people with more things to do in ever more cramped time schedules. This is about how do I get a deep connection from my Salah, even if I have just 10 minutes in a really rushed lunch break. Can I get something more from the Salah than just fulfilling my legal obligation under the Islamic law? And I think the answer is yes, we can. And neither is it just a yes just for our soteriological benefit, our hereafter benefit, in terms of our answerability on the Day of Judgment. I think this is also about the fidunya hasana, the blessings in this world that we pray for in Qunut, and Salah can facilitate that, I believe. Because I think there are important correlates between how we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do and the way our psychology works as human beings. And we're learning more and more about that from research in psychology and in neuroscience, about aspects of life that we find prevalent in religious teachings. And I think Salah captures many of these aspects that can be brought to the service of our mental health, and more importantly, to the service of enabling us to connect more effectively with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to achieve the niyyah that we would have set at the beginning of the Salah, as we discussed in the earlier episodes, of qurbatan Allah, of attaining proximity to Allah. And in so doing, to give us a degree of peace and tranquility that, at least during that period of that Salah, breaks the cycles of rumination and anxiety generation that we see as being a feature for too many people, too much of the time, in our 21st century reality that we are faced with. So modern stresses can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can create these kind of problems. On the other hand, we can utilize the stresses that we have to serve as a vehicle to improve the quality of our worship. So that not only can we do more, we can also be more as well. And what I mean by that is, whilst we may be busy doing more in our work, etc., and trying to, run harder to stay still on the never-ending treadmill that modern life often represents, but we have the opportunity to shift our mindset so that we can be more as human beings, whilst we are engaging in the things we need to do for our survival. So regardless of whether we're at work or whether we're at home looking at our family or whatever it might be, if we just have a few minutes for our prayers, the question then changes from, did I say my prayers, or am I going to be able to say my prayers, to how was the prayer? It's like when you've got a diary appointment to meet an old friend who you really love deeply. The question is not, oh, did you meet the friend? Of course you met the friend. That's not the question. The question is, how was the meeting? And often we hear the way we think about Salah in conversations between parents and children, where the parent might say to the child, and I'm guilty of this as a parent myself, saying to my child, have you said your prayers? And I'm asking the wrong question as a parent. I should be asking the question, how was your prayer? How did you find it? What was the experience like? But often we tend not to think about the experience of salah because we're so busy doing it as a checklist, as a legal tick box, that, oh, I have fulfilled my legal obligation now. I'm done. I can get back to my work or get back to my play or whatever I was doing. And I think that really is a disservice to ourselves. And this may be why Surah Ma'un talks about فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, as we discussed earlier, woe upon those who pray, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ sahun, that they are heedless. But then we have the promise that we see in Surah Mu'minun about those who are khashun, who are mindful of their prayers, being successful. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And so this discussion is all about the how of it. How do we avoid being amongst those who are woeful and amongst those who are successful? And one of the areas of that shift is, I think, a psychological one. And we've been looking at the psychology of the entire process, from wudu to qibla to adhan, ikama, takbirat al-ihram, qiyam, the qiraat that we recite, ruku, kunut, sujud. And now we've reached the last stage of the prayer. We've reached Tashahud and Salaam. And let us remember how we come into Tashahud. We're coming up from the second sajda. And of course, just to recap, when somebody asked Imam Ali alayhi salam about sajda, what is sajda? He highlighted how sajda really represents the synopsis of Islamic theology in its entirety, whereby you're saying the first sajda is our enactment, really, in our embodying the principle of us being created from the dust. And we come up. We recognize that. And when we go back, that is a recognition that we will be returning to dust. And so the transience of human life is highlighted. But then when we rise up, that's the resurrection. And the judgment that goes with it, the evaluation. So what? What difference does it make to our salah? All too often, we find that we may be conscious at the point of niyyah, we do takbir al-ihram, and then we switch to autopilot. And next thing we know, we've finished our prayers. We're doing the final salam. It's like, so what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? Where was I? Because I wasn't here. I was in autopilot mode thinking about my work or my worries or my hopes or my dreams. But I wasn't here. I wasn't present. And it's this cultivating this mindfulness, this presence, that a psychological approach to salah is all about. So thinking about sajda, for instance, in the way that Imam Ali Islam highlighted, changes our reality of it. Because if when we go down for that second sajda, we are thinking about a reminder of our mortality, on the one hand, that can seem quite a depressive thought, but I think that can be quite a liberating thought, in the sense that it highlights to us that there is a bigger picture here, beyond the narrow confines of the problems and the stresses we may be facing. And what I mean by that, just to be clear in case we get misunderstood, what I mean by that is that by thinking about the wider purpose of our existence, we can free ourselves from the rumination or from the constant thinking about our worries and our stresses, and we can actually place our lives in a greater context, in a more meaningful context. And also recognizing that whilst we may be very concerned about this particular issue, in the overall big picture, it might not mean that much. It might not be as important as we think it is, particularly in the context of our mortality and the overall purpose of our being. So when we come up from sajda, we've really embodied the teaching from Surah Taha, Surah 20, verse 55, Minha khalaqnakum, that from it we have created you. وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ, and into it we will return you. وَمِنْهَا نُخْرِجُكُمْ تَارَةً أَخْرَى, and from it we will draw you, extract you for a second time. So that when we think about, if let's say we've been on autopilot for the whole prayer, if we make a point that at least for that final sajda we're conscious of this point, it can create a moment of connectedness and mindfulness, so that we have broken, at least for that moment, the chains of that rumination. And we have connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at least in that one moment. So that even in a short 10-minute prayer, we come out of it having experienced the sweetness, having tasted the sweetness of connection. Therefore, when we go into Tashahud and we're coming out from sajda, we're coming with a great momentum, a great spiritual momentum, whereby if we've truly surrendered in salah, then we're not rising from salah, from sajda, we're lifted from sajda. And that creates that momentum of going into Tashahud. And of course, there are different ways of commencing the Tashahud.
Yeah, that's very interesting about how you say, the surrender, and then and there is that often that feeling of surrender and that intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, like you say, commencing the Tashahud. And as I had heard many years ago, someone beginning it with Bismillah wa Billah. So instead of going straight into saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, you start off with that kind of introductory Bismillah Billah, and I found that quite a nice way of beginning the Tashahud as well. It has its own way of entry as well, because you've been talking about how we are entering the Salah and knocking on the door of Salah, and this seems to also be that kind of pause before then we go on to say the Shahadatain.
I mean, yes. I mean, the entry of Bismillah by the name of Allah, wa billah, and when with Him, then changes the way the Tashahud is recited, and makes us conscious that actually we are not alone in this, and neither are we the active agent in this. That there is a power that moves through us.
Yeah.
Just like with the Bihawlillah, as we discussed in previous discussions, that we get back up onto our feet by the power of Allah.
Yeah.
And therefore, and similarly, figuratively, for other problems we're having in our lives, we can address it through the assistance and the spiritual strength we get to cope with our problems. Similarly, going into Tashahud, which is the conclusion of the Salah, if we go in with the sense that bi ismillah wa billah, that by His name and with His strength, we then go into really the theological climax of Salah. Why so? Because the Tashahud is really a shahada. It's a bearing testimony to the core creed of what Islam is all about. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. Now, psychologically, that's quite powerful, because quite often we elevate our problems into becoming gods of their own, often quite demonic gods, who have absolutely no rahmah, no mercy whatsoever. And bearing witness that there is only one God who is merciful and entirely compassionate is helpful, because often we spend our lives, particularly our working lives, worshipping a rather tyrannical God of money. And when we think that actually we have inadvertently elevated our life problems and challenges to becoming masters over us. That simple line, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, can be quite liberating, that I can reconnect back to what is truly important. And if I don't get what I'm striving for, it's not the end of the world. So the anxiety that builds up with striving can be dissipated. That doesn't mean we reduce our ambition. No, we can be just as ambitious in whatever professional activity or social activity or spiritual activity we were doing before we came to the prayer mat. But we free ourselves from the attachment to the outcome that can result in negative mental states and anxiety that can build up around that. So that Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah is really quite a powerful key to unlock a new state of being as we conclude the Salah, and as a way of then propelling us into the rest of our day. That, I mean, the Tashahud and Salaam is incredibly powerful as preparing the ground for re-entry back into our ordinary existence, and to change the ordinary to becoming extraordinary by a new way of looking at what we were doing. So that when I go back to my desk after work, after taking my lunch break and doing salah, when I go back to that same activity, I should, in principle, have a new way of looking at it, having re-entered that normal existence from being in this special state of salah. Hence the importance of the first aspect of that tashahud of la ilaha illallah, and then washhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, that Muhammad is his messenger. Now, the next bit, the salawat, is quite powerful, because it raises the question, as we see from the Holy Quran, which guides us. Inna Allahu malaikatu yusalluna ala nabi ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. O you who believe, send the angels and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send blessings on the Holy Prophet upon him. O you who believe, you send blessings as well, plentifully. Now, this idea of Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Sallu wa sallim, there are different aspects. It's not just sending blessings on, but it's also following the example of as well, and heeding the call made by him. And the call essentially was about connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawheed was the essence of that message. So if we are worshipping other gods, and I don't mean in a theological way, I mean in a psychological way. Often our problems can become elevated to a tyrannical God. Our manager at work can take on that kind of role in our mind. Our children can sometimes. Our parents can. Our spouses. There are many issues. Our health can become that way. So there are many things to which we become subservient. And this idea is really about freedom. Freedom from all the forms of subservience that we have inadvertently succumbed to, and to really re-establish the true one Lord that we want to freely worship. And so then the role of the salawat changes from something that we do as Quranic practice to something that is actually a gift for ourselves. Because the Holy Prophet already has the pool of Kawthar. He doesn't need my salawat. I need to recite salawat for my benefit. That it purifies my soul and my heart to recognize what the essence of his message was, and to remind myself of that, and how his holy progeny, Ahl Bayt al-Islam, continued in that, so that we receive that message today. But having established that theological creed, we then go on to the Salaam, which is how we conclude. And I think it's quite important to think about the foundation we have laid for that Salaam. Because that Tashahud, when we look at the teachings about the inner dimensions of Tashahud, we're told that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us in a physical form, so that we may worship in different forms, with our minds, with our hearts, with our tongues, with our limbs. So that as we sit in Tashahud, we need to think about how we are sitting. Are we slouching? Are we sitting with a straight back, with good, clear posture? Because how we sit is a reflection of perhaps how we may be thinking. If we're thinking in a lackadaisical way, we may sit in a slouchy way. If we are clear-minded, purposeful, and objective, it would reflect in our posture. And regarding the mindset with which we recite the salawat, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, has said, and this is in various texts, for example, Jami al-Akhbar, he says, whoever recites one salutation upon one salawat upon me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends 10 up to the reciter. And whoever recites 10 salutations to me, notice we do 10 in a day, he will reciprocate with 100. So, if we are receiving 100 blessings a day, do we feel blessed? Because all too often, when we recite this tashahud and we declare, for example, in Surah Al-Fatiha, at the beginning of the prayer, that Allah is the most merciful, the most compassionate, do we feel any of that rahmah? We see all these ahadith, all these teachings of how there are angels above us, proclaiming the blessings upon us. But when we reach that end of that salah, do I feel blessed as I'm finishing my salah? Or do I just think, oh, okay, now I've got another, 46 minutes to get back to my desk, and I've got to get the dry cleaning done, I've got to pick up a sandwich, and I've got to do this. Do I actually allow myself to feel the blessing that is upon me? And if I don't, what is the cost of not doing so? What do I lose by being heedless? Remember that verse from Surah Ma'un. Why is there woe upon me then if I've been heedless? What have I lost when I deprive myself of the realization of the blessings that have just been given to me? When you are given a precious gift, you feel blessed. You feel, wow, I've got something really, I've got an amazing present here. You feel special and you feel valued. We are being taught in the process of Salah that we are valued by the one who is the most valuing and the most value-worthy, values us as his creation. So that I should not go back to work. So let's say in the morning, if I've had a really bad experience with my manager at work and I've been made to feel worthless as an employee, I take my lunch break and I go and say my prayers. If I allow myself to recognize that I have been blessed as someone who is worthy of communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for him to hear my prayer, Sami Allahu liman hamida, we recite, surely Allah hears one who exalts him. If I've had that kind of connection, it changes my notion of self-worth. And often when we look at different types of psychological problems, concomitant with them is a deficiency in our self-esteem and or our self-worth. That's salawat, and that process of tashahud and salam is the culmination of the blessings upon us, that we are then sharing that. Sharing that with whom we have received it from. So we received that teaching of salah from the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. So the gift we have received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the salah, we then use that power that we have received to recite a salawat. That salawat changes everything. It is really a manifestation of my worth, not because of my ego or pride or anything, no, but the worth that has been intrinsically instilled within me. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, as the Holy Quran teaches, that we have created humankind in the best of molds. All of them. Not just person A, B or C, but the whole of humanity. Regardless of whether the world out there may see an individual as being disabled. It's a terrible choice of words that we inflict on other human beings. But that is still a member of the Ashraful Makhlukat. It's still a member of the greatest of what human spirituality can offer, which is what makes human beings special in this sense, the spirituality that is embedded within us.
There was just a small point I was going to make as well, that ironically we often find in the Muslim world, again with children who are being raised to do their salah, and again when that raising focuses very much upon the external aspect of the salah. So like we were saying, have you said your prayer? And I remember many years ago meeting a young woman who was from a very religious practicing family, but she said that when I pray, I can't feel anything because I was raised to pray to please my mother. So I associate praying with making my mother happy.
Right.
And she longed to feel something in her salah, but you know, the kind of converse effect of the parent trying so hard to make sure their child definitely prays on time, and is that sometimes the child can end up with a low self-esteem and a poor sense of self, because I'm not finding myself in this salah, I'm just doing it because I have to, and I'm going to feel guilty if I don't because I've upset my mother. And she said that when she used to do salah, she had to do it out of sight of her mother, otherwise she couldn't concentrate. So I think, like you're saying, if someone has, like a boss at work has made you feel unworthy, I think even within many of the homes around the world, there are people being raised with these beautiful practices and words, but at the same time not being able to connect to the actual meaning of them. So I think this is very useful that, to say to those people who may have reached their late teens, early 20s, and they're saying, I just can't feel that connection, and I wish I could, that, again, this is a way into being able to feel that you can make the salah something between you and Allah. However you've been raised, whoever has told you and over-told you and made you feel guilty, you can set that aside and make this salah your salah between yourself and Allah.
Yeah. And there's also the aspect of loneliness with that as well, and the tyranny of loneliness that comes with that. And this is where I feel the salam at the end of the salah is really quite powerful, because then we're bringing ourselves into a much wider context with those upon whom we send salutations. And it links back to our qibla point that we made in our early discussions, where when we orientate ourselves towards the Kaaba, towards Makkah, we're also pointing in the same direction that all the previous saints did as well throughout time. And in the salam, we connect to them. So we begin with Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That we send our salutations to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullah, may the blessings of Allah be upon you. That's quite a powerful statement.
Yeah.
Because we are connecting with him, we're praying in the direction that he taught, through the qibla, in the way that he taught. And we are then reconnecting back to him through our salah. So we're not alone, because we are told that when someone says salam, the response is obligatory.
Yeah.
And the Prophet would, as the one who came for akhlaq, innama bu'ithtu li'utammima makarim al-akhlaq, surely I've been sent for the perfection of human character, he would not refrain from that practice. And we need to be conscious that we receive a response to the salam.
Yeah.
And we continue, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. That salutations upon you who are the pious worshippers. So who are they?
Yeah.
We send our salams upon the ibadillahi salihin, but do we reflect upon who they are? Now, one could generically say it's all the pious people, all those who are salihun, but actually it's deeper than that. Because when we look at who the Quran exalts as being those who qualify under these criteria, it is not out of coincidence or any form of emotional rhetoric that we laud the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We know that we praise them, and we when I say Lord, I mean L-A-U-D, not L-O-R-D,
yes,
as we're often accused.
Yes.
I mean, to celebrate their teachings and to follow their guidance in how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as Surah Insan guides us, that these are the people who have given everything that they had in order to fulfill the spirit of the teachings. وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. That they have fed, and the feeding was not just a physical but a spiritual feeding of those who are spiritually impoverished, those who are spiritually orphaned, who may be disconnected, and those who are spiritually imprisoned by their own actions and the mistakes that they may have committed. So when we send at the end of the salah our salam on the ibadullah salihin, it's really important that we recognize that there is a context to the salah, that there are particular spiritual entities who we are sending salam to, and then concluding with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're concluding with the point of rahmah, of mercy upon all, and so that we are re-establishing the compassion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has introduced himself as the compassionate. Therefore we also should have compassion upon ourselves as well, because that rainfall of mercy falls upon us as well, so that we are worthy of compassion. And that changes the way we go back to our work. If someone gave you a really incredible present, you would feel differently about yourself to before that episode. So if I've just got an amazing gift and I feel that Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and I allow myself to feel the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that descend from that, I've just got an incredible gift. So when I go back to my desk at work, I should be very cheerful. I've just got something amazing.
Yeah.
And this might be why we're told in our teachings that Imam Ali Islam guides, that those who are true scholars of Islam are cheerful. They're not dour. They're cheerful people because they are cognizant and they see the rahmah, the mercy, the compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever they look. There's a positive shift in their psychology, that whatever they look through the lens of a positive perspective. But I need to just clarify something here. Often we are accused of sending salams to those who are dead.
Yeah.
Astaghfirullah. So we're told, I hate to say the words, but we need to, for the sake of clarity, say, Mata Muhammad. So Muhammad is dead, so you don't need to send salams on him. Well, that approach is contrary to how the salah is taught.
Yeah.
We are taught in the salah to say, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullah. Why would you send salams on somebody who is spiritually dead and can't respond? It makes no sense. Of course there must be a spiritual life, and when we look at the Holy Quran, it reiterates this not once but twice. So we've discussed the first surah, and we talked about how the Quran says, Ihdana Salat al-Mustaqim, Salat al-Ladhina anamta alayhim, that guide me to the straight path, the path of those who you have blessed. And then in Surah Baqarah, the next surah, we see in Surah 2, verse 154, says, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا. Do not say about those who have died in the way of Allah as being dead, amwat, بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ, rather they're alive. وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ, but you do not perceive their spiritual existence. And in case we missed it in the second surah, it's repeated in the third surah, in the third chapter of the Quran, in verse 169. It says, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ إِنَّ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ, that with their Lord is their spiritual sustenance. So that we can have confidence that when we say, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alayka ya ibadillahi salihin, that when we send our salutation upon the Holy Prophet and all the pious saints, there is a response to that salam. Because they have a spiritual life as declared by the Holy Quran. Which means that when we end our salam, we place ourselves in a much wider context. And we can perceive the warmth of the response to our salam. Changes the experience of salah altogether. Yeah. It doesn't matter how long you have for salah. If you have just 10 minutes in your lunch break and you experience that at that point of salam, you go back to your desk a different person.
Yes, cognizant of the fact that that's been replied to by your Prophet.
And the Ibadullah Salihin. And reconnecting also in the physical direction in which we're praying with our Qibla. That was the direction which they prayed in as well. Yeah. So we're reconnecting with them physically and spiritually. So the aspects of loneliness that we may be suffering from can also be alleviated. And that's one of the translations of the word shafa. From Ayatul Kursi, from Surah Baqarah, Man dhal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'idhnih. Who is there who can intercede with him, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than through his permission? So the Ibadullah Salihin, to whom we send salams in our salah, are those who have been given permission. Illa bi'idhnih, who have been given permission for that shafa, for that intercession. And part of intercession is to give companionship. When we look at the etymology of the root word, sheen, fa'ain, and we look at the root meanings of that, to bring companionship to that which was previously alone is an aspect of shafa. So that when we conclude our salah, we're not alone. We have that spiritual fulfillment in our hearts of having connected with the core light of the Islamic tradition.
That's very beautiful. Thank you very much, Brother Ghulam Abbas, again for a very insightful discussion of this part of the Salah. And this is the 9th in a 10-part series. Inshallah, we'll see you again in the next program, the final one. And again, to our viewers, I hope that this was beneficial for you. To remind you, this is a 10-part series. It is available online, so you can catch up with any programs that you have missed. And we look forward to you tuning in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.